Hey, what's up? My name's Justin. Welcome to 65 Drums. I recently got an email, actually a long time ago, where a guy asked me to do a dedicated video about backup drum sets. Basically, this is a drum set to be there in case crap hits the fan. It's not a large drum set, it's very portable, basically a drum set in a suitcase. And even if you don't want to have a backup drum set, and I realize not everyone wants to have one, you can use this for small gigs. So for example, maybe you're playing at a very small wedding and you don't have to bring your giant drum set. You don't have to look impressive or anything like that. Stage presence isn't a necessary component of that gig. Then you can bring up your backup drum set because it's easier to carry to that gig. When tackling this issue, I was doing research on prices and stuff, and I basically came up with a couple of main avenues you could take, because there's a lot of different ways to create a backup drum set. And strategy number one is to build it yourself out of components you found on eBay. So this is kind of what it would look like. Now that drum set is undoubtedly the most beautiful kit you've ever seen in your life, isn't it? The point here is that you can buy everything separately on eBay. Some people don't realize this. You can actually buy the drum rack separately. They're only like 60 bucks if you buy a cheap small one. You can buy the snare, the kick drum, the module, the wires, the hi-hat controller pedal. Everything is sold separately. And the good idea behind this method is that you can make it as expensive or as inexpensive as you want. So for example, you can go with all rubber pads if you want this to be a really, really cheap kit, or you can go with mesh pads like on that kit behind me if you want to spend a little bit more money. You get to decide what drum module, yada, 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 on and on and on. It's basically up to you. But as you've guessed, there's got to be some sort of major problem with this method. Unfortunately, it gets kind of expensive when you buy individual components, because think about it. A mesh pad versus a rubber pad. These things go anywhere from like 30 to 50 bucks. A mesh pad goes like from 100 on up. So it's always cheaper to go with rubber pads. And if you want to keep this emergency backup drum set around the $500 range, and if you want to build it out of individual components, you're probably going to end up with rubber pads. That's why I don't really recommend this method unless you're willing to spend like $1,000 to really do it right. Okay, so let's move on to strategy number two. Strategy number two is just to buy a used, reliable electronic drum set. So if you want to do it this route instead of buying all the individual components, you can actually save hundreds of dollars. So for example, I was on a music website the other day, I think it was guitarcenter.com, and I saw a used Roland TD7 drum set for like 270 bucks. It's all rubber pads, the drum module's old, the whole drum set is very old, but it will probably still last a while because it's hard to break an all rubber pad drum set because the components are so darn simple. So you have a reliable backup drum set at a really, really cheap price. Now, of course, if you want something a bit nicer, you can buy a used Roland TD6 drum set, a used Roland TD4 drum set. It'll have a mesh snare on it, and that will run you about 500 bucks. And you'll actually get a mesh snare out of the deal, and you didn't have to go hunt all over the internet trying to find a drum rack and the pads and the module and the cables or anything. No, it's all right there for you. So this is probably the easiest, simplest route to go if you just want to buy a backup drum set. And you can make this drum set as compact as you want. So here's a couple of ideas. Number one, you don't have to bring every single cymbal and every single tom pad if you don't want. If you just want this to be a really simple, kick, snare, hi-hat, ride cymbal, floor tom thing, you can do that. If you've got a 4-post rack system, you don't have to bring the entire drum rack. I know it sounds kind of nuts, but you can just take away one of the legs and one of the posts, and now the drum rack is smaller. You weren't going to have a full set of toms anyway, and now you have a drum set that's a little bit more portable. So that's definitely a route to go. So you can get a quality electronic drum set that's your emergency backup kit, or as your smaller travel drum set for 500 bucks, and it will be reliable and it will be cheap. Okay, so that's option number one and number two. Now let's talk about option number three. Option number three is to buy an electronic drum set that is purpose-built from the ground up to be portable. So all these drum sets fold down and you can fit them in a bag of some sort. You got the Roland TD4 KP, you got the Roland TD1 KPX2, and then you've got the Roland HD series, which is no longer in production. The Roland TD4 KP, this drum set is something that I would consider an emergency backup drum set, or something that you would take to very small gigs. They even sell a bag for it. You can fold it down to practically nothing, throw it over your shoulder, and then put it in the front seat of your car if you really want to. The only problem is that it's got all rubber pads, so it's not going to be that inspiring to play. but at least you do have a kick drum tower that's built into the drum rack itself. And it's baby brother or big brother, I don't know how you call this, but the Roland TD1 KPX2 is very, very similar. But instead of the Roland TD4 drum module, it has the Roland TD1 drum module, and it's got mesh pads. So it's like an upgrade and a downgrade at the same time. It's kind of weird. This thing costs over $1,000. So I wouldn't seriously look into this, but I just wanted to let you know that it does exist. And it's pretty much the same thing, except with a different module and pads. All right, so moving on to the next drum set line, we have the Roland HD series. The HD3 was their last one, I believe, and they are really fun to play. The only problem here is that they don't have an actual kick drum tower. They've got these like pedals that are like built into the drum rack. It's really, really strange. So I don't really recommend this as your emergency backup drum set. It's more like a drum set for practice that you could fold up and put in your closet when you weren't using it. So if you want a backup emergency portable drum set, I would recommend the Roland TD4 KP. Okay, so moving on to option number 4, and a lot of drummers actually do this. You could buy a multipad as your base and then build out a few pads from here, and now you have a really, really tiny electronic drum set that has a lot of flexibility. You can actually assign whatever sound you want to these pads, obviously. So you can have a row of toms right here, a couple of crash cymbals, and then on the back you can see that there are inputs here. You can plug in a snare, you can plug in a kick drum pad, you can plug in a hi-hat controller. So you can actually build out a small little drum set out of just a multipad as the base. So the really cool thing about this setup is that there's a million different ways to mount everything. So for example, I've got a small Go eDrum drum rack right there, and it just makes it easier for me, but you don't have to use a drum rack if you don't want to. Those do take up a lot of space in the trailer or in the back of the van. So you could just have a like cymbal stand and then mount the multipad to that. All you gotta do is remove the top of the cymbal stand and then just mount this on top of it. And then the next thing you could do is buy a dedicated snare stand for your mesh snare drum, and then maybe buy a cymbal stand for your hi-hat. And then of course you got your hi-hat controller, and bam, now you have a tiny little drum set that you can take literally anywhere, and it doesn't take up that much space at all. And then there's some websites that even sell bundles. For example, on craftmusic.com, not sponsored or anything, but they sell a $1,000 bundle where you can get an Octopad from Roland and then a couple of high quality pedals. Now, of course, I like having an actual kick drum tower, so I wouldn't go for this personally, but you can buy a package where they just put together the whole drum set for you right out the gate. So if you're sold on the idea and you really like the concept, the natural question is, what kind of multipad should I buy? Here are a couple of different options at different price points. So on the low end, if you don't have that much money to spend, I would definitely take a look at the Elisa Sample Pad Pro. Now the problem is, this thing is definitely not perfect. I own it, I've done a full review on it, a full tutorial on it if you want to go check those out. The main problems are long load times and then crosstalk issues. Now you can dial away the crosstalk issues if you crank up the threshold, but the problem is when you do that, you lose sensitivity from the pads. So you're kind of screwed either way you go. And then if you can spend a little bit more money, I would take a look at the Roland Octopad or the Yamaha Multipad 12. Those two are great multipads. The Yamaha one's probably the better one of the two, but either way, you're gonna be in a rock solid place. So those are the three multipads I would look at if you have a little bit of money or a lot more money. The one thing I've noticed about multipads is that the used market is very, very strong. So you can always find something at a reasonable price on eBay or reverb.com if you want to save a few bucks. So the whole premise of this video so far has been about backup emergency drum sets that are there in case crap hits the fan. And really, crap will hit the fan one day. You're fooling yourself if you don't think that, because electrical components always break. And it's not an if, it's a when. You're just hoping your electronic cymbal breaks when you're home versus when you're in the middle of a song. And yes, this one is broken and I'm not quite sure what's wrong with it. Even Roland gear does break over time. It just doesn't break quite as fast as other brands. So what I like to do is not necessarily bring an emergency backup drum set, just bring a bunch of extra components. Because I'm using a hybrid drum set behind me and it's working off of internal triggers, what I do is I bring a couple of Roland RT30 and RT10 clip-on triggers. So in case the snare drum trigger gives out, I can literally slap this on my drum and then I can tighten it down, plug in the wire, and I'm all of a sudden playing again. The triggering performance of this $50 trigger won't be as good as like the $150 trigger that I have in the snare already, but it will work, it will do the job, and it'll save my butt. And that's the whole point of the video, basically covering yourself in case something bad happens. I also bring an extra hi-hat controller, I bring extra cables, I bring extra everything. You can even bring an extra drum pad if you want. The whole idea here is just being prepared for any problem that comes around. So here's the question of the day. Do you bring backup gear to your gigs, like, extra cymbals, an extra tom pad or something? Or do you just fly it solo and just hope nothing goes wrong? Or do you bring a full backup drum set? I want to know. Let me know down in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in a few.